Violence is never justified. But seen in this context, amid a highly toxic environment, defined by mistrust and resentment, stoked by years of bad feelings, and spurred by illegal and misguided practices, it's not difficult to imagine how a single tragic incident set off the city of Ferguson like a powder keg. In a sense, members of the community may not have been responding only to a single isolated confrontation, but also to a pervasive, corrosive, and deeply unfortunate lack of trust.
The issue facing American law enforcement: how to root out the bad cops and still ensure there is law and order. Still with us, former Atlanta police officer and attorney Marc Harrold. Joining us now, the former LA police sergeant we call the voice of reason in law enforcement, who has been there and seen it all, author of the book Black and Blue, The Creation of a Manifesto. Let's welcome back Cheryl Dorsey. Sergeant, good to see you again.
Hi, Ed. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. Sergeant, I'm going to start with you as we continue the conversation here from where it has been. There is now the discussion about making sure that law enforcement fits its community, because, again, if you look at the disparity between white and black here in Ferguson, it is stunning. I think there were only 4 African-American officers actually on the force. Is it really, number one, possible to hire people, enough people, qualified people, to be police officers and fit a community? Or is it simply just something that we have to think about? You can't do it everywhere. You still have to get the best cop.
Well, certainly there are the best cops out there amongst the black and brown community in Ferguson, and so they just have to make a concerted effort to find those people, and they need to have somebody to speak to them in a real way who looks like them, who's been there and done that, much like I have, and someone who they feel that they can trust.
But what if that's not possible, Sergeant? What if it's not possible if you have a specific community where it's simply put, and I'm not making excuses, but you find somebody who say, we cannot hire enough Hispanic officers, we can't find enough African-American officers, so we have to do with the best cop possible.
Okay, so then let's deal with what we have, and let's provide the best training that we can provide, and let's make sure that they have the tools that they need to do that job professionally, ethically, and morally right. And if we find that we have someone who is not following policy and procedure, there needs to be a consequence.
All right, Mark, I'm going to come to you on this because there's the 2 words that I always am focused on: ethics and morality here. Now, is it, boy, this is tough. Is it really possible to teach that, though? Because don't you have to find somebody who, when they walk in to become a cop, they've got to have some morals and they've got to have some ethics right off the top? And if they don't have it, you bounce them. You don't take a chance on them. You don't let them slide by.
Well, absolutely. If there's some sort of litmus test you can give for that that's so clear, I believe that you do need great character to be a good police officer, a great police officer, and you certainly need to have a moral fiber. But it's very tough. You're talking, I was with City of Atlanta, and I believe Sarge was with LAPD, which is even larger, and you're talking about huge numbers. You have billets to fill. They need to hire people. I came on right before the '96 Olympics. As you can imagine, they were trying to hire a lot of people at one time. So absolutely, there shouldn't be, if you have somebody who's unethical, immoral, does not have the character to be a police officer, you should bounce them. But there's fiscal realities once people have been trained, once they get out there, that there is sometimes a reluctance by police agencies to let people go after they've invested money in training and they have some experience behind them.
Okay, wait a minute. There it is, a reluctance to let people go who may not fit. How do you then get past that?
Well, I mean, you obviously have to have consequences when people break policy. There's no doubt about that. But look, these things are not easy to figure out who the good and bad cops are. But I can say honestly, every time we had somebody in the department that someone thought had acted improperly or who is caught doing something criminal, everyone that I know would be like, well, you must have known that was going on. You really don't always know, because if those cops are doing criminal activity and they are criminals themselves, they're not exposing themselves in all cases to the good police officers, the police officers that would turn them in. So I think it's tough, but it all to me comes down to training. You have to have a department that stresses training and education, and also diversity to the point that I believe. I was in City of Atlanta, almost exclusively in African-American communities, and there's no doubt in my mind, especially when I was much younger, that I never truly had the perspective to always understand that my experience with police officers as a white male is very different from other communities' experience with police officers. You have to really train and have perspective, or it's very hard to be a police officer in an area you're not familiar with.
Sergeant, aren't we once again, and you and I have spoken about this, but we've got to hammer on it, aren't we once again at the end of the day coming back to this blue line, the blue shield, if you will, the fact that you have bad cops that are protecting bad cops, we still have to get in there somehow, and there's got to be a way to dig them out. They feel like they can't tell the truth, they don't want to tell the truth, they're getting paid not to tell the truth. Something here has got to break eventually. You've got to find a way through this.
And so what we need to do is we need to reward the good behavior, those officers who do step forward, and then we need to hammer the bad behavior. We need to banish them to the cornfields, never allow them to go work for another agency, and then once you set that precedence, I believe that the officers who do right will then make sure that the officers who don't do right are not infecting that system.
Banish them? Shouldn't we just, I mean, as far as, let's take a step back maybe, not banish them. Let's charge them. Let's put them in jail. Let's call them the criminals that they are, and let's start putting them in with the people. Boy, I'll tell you what, that's going to stop pretty fast when you start putting cops in jail.
And that's exactly what I mean when I say banish them. There needs to be a significant consequence for bad behavior.
Let me then ask you, then I only got about 2 minutes left. And Sergeant, by the way, I know that you recently met with Representative Jackson Lee, Sheila Jackson Lee. I want to talk about that. We might not have enough time today, so we are going to have you back because I do want to talk about that. But some specific issues here. I'm going to throw it to you first. Knowing what we know now from Ferguson, where do we start that will make substantive change? First thing that has to be done to start rooting out these bad cops.
The first thing that we need to do is we need to identify those people and get them off the streets. We need to provide training for those officers that are dealing with the public on a day-to-day basis. And then we need to do an outreach to get officers to replace those bad ones that we're going to get rid of.
Isn't that awful tough, though? We're still talking about an outreach here because we still have to go out and find good cops. What happens if there's not enough in the community?
Well, I don't believe that there's not sufficient a pool to pull from. And I certainly don't believe that there aren't good cops on the department that exist. They just have to understand that that bad behavior that they are witnessing can no longer be tolerated, and it's time for them to step up and tell the truth and be honest and get rid of those bad officers.
It is time for not only the police departments, but is it not time for the communities as well to step up from the mayor on down, correct?
I believe the problems are symptomatic, cultural, and top-down. So when you have a police chief, you have a captain, you have a lieutenant who acquiesces to misbehavior, then you understand why the street pounders, the patrol officers are doing it.
Mark, 10 seconds. First thing we need to do.
Well, that's exactly right. You're going to have a zero tolerance. It's going to have to go to the top, and you're going to have to show that you're serious, that it's not business as usual. The consent decree, if they agree to it, will be a good first step. Be interesting to see how they try to implement what they found in these reports. And so it's not just a piece of paper. It actually, calls for some sort of action.
Marc Harrold and Cheryl Dorsey, I love having these conversations. Sergeant Dorsey, we will have you back again to talk about what you're doing in Congress right now to get things pushed along. I thank you both for your time and your honesty.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarge.
All right, everybody, take care. We're back right here on MidPoint.